This is the story of a reassigned seating chart, a redirected motorcade at the grand entrance of Buckingham Palace, and the exact moment Queen Camilla realized the ultimate arena of international diplomacy is not a private dinner party for her relatives in less than 24 hours. The carefully constructed illusion of her absolute authority over the state's highest social functions was quietly and ruthlessly dismantled by a velvet rope and a politely unyielding security officer. What Queen Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that a title might grant you the diamond tiara and the seat at the head of the table. But true institutional power is forged in strict international protocol, sovereign bloodlines, and the silent, impenetrable control of diplomatic architecture. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the highly opportunistic, visually aggressive power grab she recently attempted ahead of a crucial diplomatic state banquet. We will expose how a clandestine attempt to permanently elevate her non-royal family onto the global diplomatic stage inadvertently triggered a freezing institutional retaliation engineered by Prince William and the master of the household. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand the devastating realization currently paralyzing the Queen despite hosting the world's most powerful leaders. She commands absolutely no true authority over who belongs in the sovereign inner circle. To understand why this specific internal clash reached a boiling point in the most glittering ballroom in the country, we must first step back and recognize the staggering 30-year manipulation that brought Camilla to this pinnacle of the British social hierarchy. For 3 decades, she played the longest, most meticulous game of reputational rehabilitation in modern history. She survived the bitter public fallout of the 1990s, systematically worked to soften the global memory of her role in Princess Diana's tragedy, and patiently replaced the old institutional guards with her own staunch loyalists. Camilla knew that to survive within the firms, she had to adopt the camouflage of uncomplaining aristocratic duty while ruthlessly securing the levers of internal social power. When she was officially crowned queen, dropping the restrictive consul caveat entirely, she believed she had finally won the absolute right to dictate the visual and diplomatic identity of the modern monarchy. She operated under the fundamental belief that because she held the unwavering devotion of King Charles, she held the keys to the entire institution's guest list. She felt entirely untouchable, assuming that the sprawling palace bureaucracy, from the private secretaries to the event directors, would always bend to her personal public relations agenda. But the fatal flaw in Camilla's architecture of power is that it is built entirely on the fragile authority of a temporary reign. It completely ignores the sovereign autonomy and the fierce protective instincts of the Prince of Wales, who views state events not as social gatherings but as the rigorous machinery of national security. That dangerous illusion of absolute power became a battlefield just days ago, triggered by an overwhelming sense of opportunistic ambition and an upcoming state banquet. To understand the magnitude of this event, you must understand that a British state banquet is not merely a dinner. It is the absolute pinnacle of royal soft power. It involves 170 guests, gold plates, priceless heirlooms, and the eyes of the global diplomatic corps. In the highest echelons of the British royal family, a seating chart is not a matter of hospitality. It is the undeniable forensic evidence of shifting power and international ranking, paralyzed by a growing fear that her own family's public relevance would inevitably fade compared to the enduring global magnetism of the true bloodline. Camilla's team attempted to execute an act of silent institutional erasure. Behind the scenes, her private office drafted a highly sophisticated secret mandate aimed directly at the master of the household, the official in charge of domestic palace operations. According to internal palace leaks, Camilla was quietly pushing to radically alter the seating manifest for the upcoming diplomatic reception. She attempted to discreetly insert her sister Annabel Elliot and her non-royal children into the central horseshoe-shaped VIP diplomatic ring, the sacred space traditionally reserved exclusively for working royals, heads of state, and high-ranking ambassadors. To accommodate this aggressive social climbing, her office issued directives to deliberately push the Middleton family, as well as dedicated working royals like the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, to the peripheral overflow tables at the far edges of the ballroom. It was a calculated attempt to blur the lines between the House of Windsor and the Parker Bowles lineage on a global stage. Camilla wanted to use the immense, glittering prestige of a state visit to visually demote Catherine's family and the bloodline's loyal servants, elevating her own non-royal relatives into pseudo-royal status. She wanted to cement their presence in the ultimate sanctuary of the aristocracy before the political winds of the monarchy could shift. She assumed she could quietly push these protocol updates through the palace bureaucracy, firmly believing that no administrative official would dare question the logistical demands of the king's wife. She severely underestimated the cold forensic vigilance of Prince William and the uncompromising nature of international diplomatic law. The discovery of this secret social coup did not happen through an explosive family confrontation in the drawing rooms. It happened through a routine digital audit of the state enclosure and diplomatic manifest coordinated by the Foreign Office and the Prince of Wales's administrative team. The master of the household does not operate on drawing room gossip or palace favoritism. The office operates on strict internationally recognized constitutional protocol. When William's fiercely loyal chief of staff and the diplomatic oversight teams cross-referenced the newly submitted seating charts emanating from Camilla's office, the anomaly was immediately flagged. When the paperwork was brought directly to Prince William, the reality was immediate and chilling. He recognized this not as a harmless desire to include her sister at a dinner, but as a parasitic encroachment upon the sovereign brand. While Catherine, the Princess of Wales, continues her uncomplaining sacrifice, Camilla was weaponizing the bureaucratic system to distribute the ultimate symbols of diplomatic legitimacy to individuals who carry no royal blood, turning a state function into a private Parker Bowles networking event. For William, this crossed an invisible, unforgivable line. The response from the future king was executed with a cold, ruthless legality that used the very weight of institutional protocol as a weapon. Prince William did not engage in a messy, undignified shouting match with his stepmother, nor did he allow his press team to leak angry statements to the tabloids that would embarrass the visiting heads of state. He used the silent execution of revenge, operating with unprecedented administrative authority as the heir apparent. William quietly activated a strict binding protocol update in conjunction with the Foreign Office. Internally, this maneuver is now quietly referred to as the Diplomatic Precedence Protocol. Without a single word spoken in anger, William legally and entirely overhauled the seating and access guidelines for state functions. He dictated that the central diplomatic ring and the grand entrance are strictly reserved for individuals within the direct constitutional line of succession, formally appointed working royals and credentialed international delegates. He effectively stripped Camilla's office of all independent administrative oversight regarding state guest placement, turning the ballroom into a fortress of strict constitutional law. The execution of this silent retaliation was breathtaking in its subtlety, resulting in an absolute visual and psychological humiliation for the Queen. Camilla did not receive an angry confrontation before the event. Instead, the trap was set to spring at the exact moment she could do absolutely nothing about it. On the night of the glittering state banquet, Camilla's relatives arrived in their bespoke gowns and tailored suits, expecting to be driven through the iconic grand entrance and formally announced alongside the royal family and foreign dignitaries. They did not find a welcoming committee of subservient staff ready to usher them into the spotlight. Instead, as their motorcade approached the secure perimeter of Buckingham Palace, they hit an invisible, impenetrable wall of diplomatic protocol. The heavily armed security personnel and protocol officers at the gates operating under direct binding orders from Prince William's administrative office politely but firmly halted the vehicles. They informed the Queen's family that their entry point and seating clearance had been corrected under the new international guidelines. Their vehicles were quietly and efficiently rerouted away from the grand entrance and directed to a secondary, lower-tier entryway at the side of the palace, typically reserved for external corporate sponsors and junior staff. When they finally reached the vestibule, they were not escorted to the glittering central horseshoe table where Camilla sat. They were handed politely formalized seating cards from William's estate, directing them to a peripheral overflow room, entirely completely separated from the global media cameras and the diplomatic inner circle. What looked like a routine security and protocol update was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's social empire. By overriding her arrangements in front of the palace staff and completely sidelining her family on the most important night of the diplomatic calendar, Prince William exposed the ultimate truth of the modern monarchy. Camilla may wear the crown and host the dinner, but William controls the guest list. He enforces the protocol, and he absolutely controls the gates. As the reality of the redirected motorcade and the peripheral seating set in, Camilla, sitting at the head of the table next to the king, had to maintain her pristine aristocratic facade for the cameras while secretly experiencing a wave of cold, suffocating panic. She looked out at the glittering room and realized her family was missing. She realized that her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently exposed her total lack of operational hard power. Stripped of her illusion of supreme control, administratively walled off by her stepson, and publicly disciplined, without a single word being spoken, she knew the trap had snapped shut. Terrified by the sudden freezing reality that her influence ends where William's diplomatic authority begins, Camilla waited for the banquet to end. She then retreated to the one remaining card she had left to play. She went directly to King Charles. She presented the humiliated accounts of her family entering through the side doors and the restricted seating manifests. She demanded that the king use his supreme sovereign power to crush William's administrative blockade. She demanded that he force the Prince of Wales to apologise, rewrite the diplomatic guidelines, and aggressively enforce her absolute authority as queen over all future state events. The entire future of the internal royal hierarchy hung in the heavy, suffocating silence of the king's study as the queen stood waiting for her husband to deliver her salvation. When Queen Camilla stood in the quiet sanctuary of the king's study, demanding that Charles use the absolute power of the sovereign to crush William's administrative blockade and rewrite the diplomatic seating manifest, she expected immediate explosive compliance. For 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate shield. He had fought his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth, his political advisors, the British press, and his own children to force Camilla's acceptance into the royal fold. He had spent decades burning through his own political capital to protect her from the consequences of their shared history. Camilla fully expected that in this moment of acute diplomatic humiliation, Charles would summon Prince William and deliver a crushing reprimand. She expected the king to remind his heir that Camilla was the queen, and that her family must be granted the ultimate international visibility to preserve her dignity. But she encountered something far more terrifying than anger. She encountered a devastating silence. What appears to be true, according to those familiar with the internal dynamics of the king's household, is that Charles simply refused to intervene. He did not yell. He did not defend his wife's aggressive attempt to hijack the state banquet and elevate her non-royal relatives. He looked at the restricted access logs. He read the legally binding Diplomatic Precedence Protocol issued by his son's administrative office in conjunction with the Foreign Office. He sat in the suffocating quiet of his study, and he did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for total institutional supremacy, and it ended not with a grand declaration, but with a freezing realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the king. And as the monarch facing his own profound vulnerabilities and the fragile state of his reign, his primary overriding duty is the preservation of the crown's constitutional and diplomatic integrity. Charles knows with forensic clarity that a state banquet is not a family dinner party. It is the absolute foundation of the monarchy's international soft power. To attempt to use his emotional weight to override a strict diplomatic blockade, simply to appease his wife's social ambitions and artificially elevate her sister and children, would be an act of institutional suicide. To publicly or privately dismantle William's invocation of the Diplomatic Protocol would signal a chaotic, degraded monarchy that allows the king's wife to cannibalize the sacred state apparatus for private networking. In that singular moment of silence, Charles chose the unvarnished survival of the institution over the vanity of his wife. Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life. The king will no longer save her from the enforcers of the bloodline. To understand why this diplomatic lockout is so permanently catastrophic for Camilla, we must examine the staggering reality hiding behind her royal title. The public sees a queen dripping in historic diamonds toasting foreign presidents and projecting the image of a supreme matriarch whose social victory is absolute. They assume that because she wears the crown today, she holds the authority to dictate the social hierarchy of tomorrow. But behind closed doors, the forensic architecture of the firm tells a remarkably different story. Camilla owns virtually nothing of the royal future, and her family possesses absolutely no constitutional standing. Her secret maneuvering with the seating charts was never just about wanting her sister at a better table. It was a frantic, calculated attempt to secure a permanent visual foothold in the global aristocracy before her ultimate protector is gone. She knows that without King Charles, she instantly becomes a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the new monarch, entirely dependent on the very stepson whose diplomatic authority she just tried to bypass. In the ruthless currency of the British monarchy, proximity to the sovereign centre is capital. Her attempt to displace working royals and elevate the Parker Bowles. Lineage was born out of a terrifying awareness of her own temporary status. Prince William is not just the heir to the throne, he is the future head of state. He commands the vast administrative power of the Duchy of Cornwall, but more importantly, he commands the absolute loyalty of the state's diplomatic machinery. Camilla possesses no independent constitutional authority to rewrite international protocol. By activating the Precedence Update, William legally, quietly, and permanently locked her family out of the dynasty's inner circle, reminding her that her power is entirely theoretical while his is deeply legally structural. The realization that her entire social empire is now effectively boxed in by her stepson's administrative goodwill is a psychological prison of her own making. The illusion of absolute social control was instantly replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of her irrelevance to the international future. As Camilla's shadow empire was quietly dismantled at the side doors of Buckingham Palace, the visual landscape of the monarchy began to immediately reflect the new order. This is where the silent execution of revenge translates into undeniable public reality. In the days following this internal crisis, viewers and royal analysts noticed a profound, subtle shift in how soft power is being weaponized. The Princess of Wales emerged as a portrait of freezing, aristocratic restraint without ever having to issue a single public statement defending her territory. Catherine did not need to negotiate for respect, demand better seating for her own family, or throw a tantrum about guest lists. She simply allowed the massive quiet weight of her husband's absolute authority to protect the institution. During the state banquet, the visual shifts were devastating to anyone who knows how to read the subtle language of the palace. While Camilla's family was relegated to the periphery, Catherine took her rightful place in the central diplomatic ring, wearing a towering, iconic tiara straight from the deepest archives of the sovereign vault. She conversed flawlessly with heads of state, projecting an aura of absolute unshakable permanence. This was not a petty public relations choice. In the highest echelons of the British royal family, diplomatic placement is the forensic evidence of shifting power. By effortlessly commanding the center of the room, authorized seamlessly through her own husband's secure channels, Catherine was actively executing the institutional restoration of the true bloodline while signaling the permanent boundary placed upon Camilla. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of the nation's dignity, and steadfast loyalty to the crown will always outmaneuver the unchecked ambition of outsiders. She does not need to fight Camilla for dominance because her husband has already engineered the ultimate checkmate. The true royals remain on the inside, protecting the diplomatic integrity of the state, and the opportunistic liabilities are managed with side doors and peripheral seating assignments. This brings us to the deeper tragic meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured intense public hatred, she orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and she successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could secure her family's place in the global aristocracy and force the world to bow to her lineage. But what this story of the diplomatic banquet lockout undeniably proves is that the crown on Camilla's head cannot rewrite constitutional law. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable power. Yet she is paralyzed by the operational reality that she is merely a temporary figure in William's empire. She played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing everything for the ultimate title, only to realize too late that the Prince of Wales dictates the seating chart of the board. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making, sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her social climbing, walled off from the true diplomatic authority of the monarchy, and forced to live under the absolute unyielding protocols of the next generation. The era of the Shadow Queen attempting to restructure the international hierarchy of the state is effectively over. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.